Good morning. Good morning and welcome. A good Chodesh, at Rosh Chodesh Nisan today. Please God, it should be a beautiful month ahead. It's known as the month of the redemption. Chodesh Nisan is the month of the redemption. Please God, it should really be a month of redemption for all of us. I just want to begin by dedicating this morning's Shiur to Yochevet Chaya Bat Baruch, a young girl who just passed away this morning. Wishing her family so much strength and comfort, wishing the whole community strength and comfort during this very, very difficult time. If I could encourage you to turn on your cameras so I can see you, please do. Would love to see more faces. Much more exciting to engage and interact with faces rather than black screens. So if you can turn it on, I'd so appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so there was a British Jew who was waiting in line to be knighted by the Queen. What does he need? What does he need to do? He needs to kneel in front of her, and he's going to recite a certain phrase in Latin as soon as she taps him on the shoulder with her sword. But in the total excitement and, feelings that he's feeling as he's kneeling down and as the Queen is approaching him, when his turn comes, he completely panics and he blanks out because of the excitement of the Queen tapping him on his shoulder. And what happens is, he totally and utterly forgets every word of Latin that he's ever learned in his life, especially this phrase, this line that he had to say in front of the Queen. So thinking fast, he thinks, what other sentence do I know in a foreign language? And I can't remember anything. He's blanked out completely. And finally, he remembers the only sentence that he remembers from the Pesach Seder. And he turns to the Queen and he says to her, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot. Completely puzzled, the Queen turns to her advisor and whispers, why is this night different to all other nights? The Pesach Seder is upon us. 2 weeks to go from last night. We're headed there where it's now full motion, full swing. It's now the last stretch before the Pesach arrives. It really is a night which is completely and utterly different to all other nights. Pesach is a time, it's a week where everything is totally topsy-turvy and different from the rest of the year, but especially the Pesach Seder. We sit there at the Pesach Seder Saturday night and again Sunday night, and it is completely different to any other night of our year. I want to specifically focus tonight on the 10th step of the Seder. The 10th step is the step of Korech. And over here, what do? We've got this extremely delicious and unique sandwich that we eat. What is the sandwich? It's made up of matzah. We put inside a bit of maror, a bit of romaine lettuce, close the matzah together, and crunch. There we go, this delicious, amazing sandwich that we have at the 10th step of the Seder. Now, this tradition seems, if you think about it, it actually seems completely bizarre and strange. At this point of the Seder, step number 10, we have already eaten a lot of matzah. I think it's safe to say that we're matzahed out at this stage. We've also eaten quite a significant amount of maror. So what in heaven's name are we doing at the 10th step when we are combining the matzah and the maror together and eating it into one sandwich? I mean, at this point, all we want to do is eat something a little bit more normal. So what is the sandwich all about? And it's interesting that just before we eat the sandwich, before step number 10. So as you prepare it, you're holding it in your hands, and we say these interesting words. We say, Kain asa Hillel, bizman shebeit hamikdash haya kayam. We say, this is what Hillel did in the times of the Beit HaMikdash. He used to take Pesach, the Pesach offering, with matzah and maror, and he would sandwich them together and eat them as a sandwich. That's what we say. Okay, so first of all, who was Hillel? This is obviously Hillel's sandwich. This is what Hillel used to do. Who was Hillel? Hillel was an exceptionally great sage in the times of the Second Temple. He was born in Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq, and in approximately 31 BCE, which was about 40 years before the Romans destroyed our Second Temple, he became the leader of the Great Sanhedrin. And he became the leader during very, very turbulent, chaotic times for the Jewish people. Herod was the ruler over Israel at the time, And he was, at this point, he was executing many, many members of the Sanhedrin because he just felt they opposed him. And why not just get rid of them if I can? And so Hillel now steps up into this position. He becomes the leader of the Sanhedrin in these chaotic times. He was, it's safe to say, absolutely brilliant. And he was, as I think you could say, he was your typical Jew, which means what? He loved a good argument. Why not? Let's argue this through. Let's debate this through. In fact, the Talmud records more than 300 arguments in halacha that Hillel had with his contemporary Shammai. Hillel and Shammai were two great sages, and they loved to argue. Just an example. Hillel said that when it comes to Hanukkah, on the first night of Hanukkah, you light 1 candle. On the second night of Hanukkah, you light 2. On the 8th night of Hanukkah, you light 8. Shammai argued and said, no. On the first night of Hanukkah, you light 8 lights. On the second night, you light 7 lights. And on the 8th night of Hanukkah, you light 1 light. We follow Hillel's opinion. Hillel and Shammai also argued about the mezuzah. How do you attach a mezuzah to the door? One said, put it absolutely straight perpendicular. The other said, no, put it horizontal. And so today, what do? We almost incorporate both opinions, and we put it on a slant to incorporate both Hillel and Shammai's view on how to transfix the mezuzah to our doors. And so here Hillel comes. This is the Hillel, the brilliant Hillel that comes. And he says, at the Seder, on Pesach, let's do something extremely unique. And as the 10th step of the Seder, let's do this Hillel wrap. Let's wrap the matzah with the maror and the Pesach offering together, and let's eat it as one. So what was it about Hillel? Why was it Hillel specifically that invented this Hillel sandwich wrap? What was it about him that he was able to invent the sandwich? Now, the Torah, as we know, is exceptionally fascinating. The Torah is written in a way, it's bizarre, but it's written in a way that it can have many and often contrasting interpretations. You could have black and white on the same interpretation, and they're both correct. Both views can be true and legitimate as long as they stick to the halacha formulas that have been passed down from Moshe at Sinai. You can have both views. In fact, interestingly enough, for every single halacha that we have today, God taught Moshe 49 perspectives, showing Moshe how something could be tahor, pure, and 49 perspectives showing Moshe how something could be impure as well. So the very same thing could be pure and impure. So Moshe turned to God and said, God, help me out over here. How will there ever be any sort of clarification among the Jewish people? How will we ever know if something is right or wrong, pure or impure? And what was God's response? You follow the majority. Whatever the majority says, as in the Beth Din, the Sanhedrin, that is what you go according to. If the majority of the judges will tell you that this thing is pure, that's the answer. It's pure. If they say it's impure, you go with the impure view. And that becomes the halacha. In fact, there's a famous story explained in the Talmud about a certain oven that the Jewish people were wondering if this oven is tamei, is it pure or is it impure? And all the members of the Sanhedrin, all the rabbis actually agreed that the oven is impure. Came one of the sages, Rabbi Eliezer, and said, no, I disagree with you. It's pure. And the sage says, we're sorry. The majority opinion said that it's impure, so we can't listen to you. It's sorry, I know you think it's pure, but it's impure. The majority says it's impure. So Rabbi Eliezer turns and he says, if I am correct, this carob tree that you see right over here will take a couple of steps forward or backwards, and you will see that my opinion is true. And in fact, what happened? They all watched that this carob tree took a couple of steps and moved away. They said, no, sorry, not good enough. So Rabbi Eliezer said, okay, if my opinion is correct, the stream of water will prove it to you. And what happened? The stream of water, instead of flowing this way, began to flow the other way. And the sage says, sorry, not good enough. And then they were standing in a Beit Medrash in a shul. And Rabbi Eliezer said, if I am correct, the walls of the shul over here will prove me right. And what happened was the walls of the shul began to cave in on all the sages. The other sage, Rabbi Yoshua, said, excuse me to the walls. Do not get involved over here. This is a matter of the sages. To which the walls just stopped. They were too scared to go back to their original position because in honor of Rabbi Eliezer, a great sage. So they just stayed midway where they were. And finally, Rabbi Eliezer said, if I am correct, a voice from heaven will come out and prove that I am right. And surely a voice from heaven came down and said, Rabbi Eliezer is correct. To which the other sage, Rabbi Yoshua, turned around and said, Torah lo bashamayim hi. Torah is not in heaven, God. You gave Torah to us sages down over here, to us people down over here. And you also commanded us that the halacha goes according to the majority. And so we are going to stick to what the majority have ruled, and we will rule the oven according to the majority. And that is how halacha works. Halacha works according to the majority of the opinion of the Sanhedrin, of the sages. And so when it came to the Pesach Seder, there was a discussion regarding the Pesach meal. And the sages of the times of the Second Temple argued about a certain verse in the book of Shemot. When it comes to the Jewish people coming out of Egypt, on the night that they came out, there is a beautiful verse that God instructs them. He tells them, "Va'achlu et habasar ba'layla hazeh." You shall eat the meat, meaning the Pesach offering, on this night. Tzli eish, it should be roasted on the fire. Umatzot al mararim yochluhu, and you shall eat it with the matzah and the maror. So the three staple foods of the Pesach Seder night we learn from this verse are the Pesach offering, the Pesach sacrifice, the meat, the matzah, and the maror. So when Hillel was learning this verse, he took the verse literally. You gotta eat these three foods simultaneously, at the very same time, in the same bite. They should be in your mouth at the very same point. You've got to eat the Pesach offering, the meat, with the matzah and the maror together at the same time. How do you do that? Dum da da dum. Here comes the Hillel wrap. Wrap them into one sandwich. There you go. You have fulfilled the mitzvah par excellence. Amazing. And this is how the first Jewish sandwich was invented. It wasn't a bagel zone bagel. It didn't have lax salmon and cream cheese. It definitely wasn't a tuna sandwich with the pickles and the red onions and the lettuce that they put together. It was a sandwich of matzah, maror, and bitter herbs. I could think of better tasting sandwiches. Hillel's colleagues completely disagreed. They said, no, Hillel, you're taking this too far. What did the Torah mean in this verse? The Torah meant you've got to eat these three items at your Pesach Seder. Not together, just throughout the Seder. Ensure that you have the Pesach offering, ensure that you're eating matzah, and then also ensure that you're eating maror as well. Now, whenever there were these type of debates with these great sages, so the different opinions were presented to the great Sanhedrin, which was 71 men who were all amazing, brilliant scholars, Talmidei Chachamim. And what happened was they would present the cases, present the opinions, and the Sanhedrin would then decide. They would debate, they would discuss, they would talk, they would analyze, and then they would come up with the final verdict. And that would become the halacha. So over here as well, these two opinions were brought up in front of the Sanhedrin. Do we eat the Pesach, matzah, and maror in one bite together, as Hillel says, or do we eat them separately throughout the Seder? In this particular argument, a legal conclusion actually was never reached. For whatever reason it was, they never came to a final conclusion. And that's why today at our Pesach Seders, we incorporate both opinions, both perspectives into our Seder night. First, we eat the matzah and the maror separately at two different steps. We've got the steps of the Seder. That was according to Hillel's colleagues. And then, according to Hillel, we eat them in one bite together as a wrap, as a sandwich in the 10th step of Korach. Now, since today we don't have a temple, there's no Beit HaMikdash, we don't have the Pesach offering, the third ingredient is just eliminated. And instead of the meat, the matzah, and the maror, all we have today is matzah and maror. But we incorporate those two together to remember or to remind us of Hillel's opinion. And that's why we do what we do at the Seder. But we know that every single law, every halacha, every debate that we've had throughout Jewish history In addition to its physical, concrete, tangible meaning, which means, okay, I'm actually going to sit at my Seder and I'll eat matzah and maror, and then I'll have them together as a sandwich. So in addition to the actual physical meaning of that halacha, every one of these debates and halachas also contains a spiritual, deeper, psychological aspect to it as well, which is what makes Torah so relevant to our lives even today in 2021. This is the beauty of Torah, that every single law, every single aspect is so relevant to our life today, because it's not only a physical, tangible mitzvah, but in fact, it's deeper than that. It talks to our soul. It talks to the psychological part of us. It talks to the deeper part of us, which is relevant to every single soul, to every single Jew. So then what is the deeper significance behind Hillel's interesting sandwich of the Pesach, the matzah, and the maror that we got to eat together? I mean, let me ask you a question. Do you think God really cares how I eat my matzah and my maror in 2 weeks' time at the Seder? Do you think it really will bother God if I'll have the matzah and the maror separately and skip out the step of eating them together? I mean, doesn't he have bigger business to worry about? I'm sure he's not going to be so concerned about little me sitting at my Seder choosing not to eat the matzah and the maror together. So what is this all about? Furthermore, if you look at every single step at the Seder, when we make kiddush, when we go wash our hands, when we dip our vegetable into the salt water, when we break the matzah, the middle matzah into two, we don't ever, before we do that step, explain why we do that step. Yes, we explain to the people around us, but there's no, in the Haggadah, there's no words that we say, okay, now we are going to break the middle matzah into two as they did in the times of old. The only time, the only step in the Seder where we explain what and why we're doing, why we're performing the step, is this step of Korach. We say, Kain asa Hillel. This is what Hillel did in the times of the Second Temple. He would sandwich together the Pesach, the matzah, and the maror, and eat them together. So we explain the step of the 10th step before we actually do it. We don't do this with any of the other steps. So why is Korach different to all the other steps? Why do we explicitly explain the reason why we're doing this before we actually do it? And the answer is so profound. In fact, King Solomon, in the book of Proverbs, wrote like this. He said, 3 things are wondrous to me, and 4 I do not know. Again, King Solomon, 3 things are wondrous to me, and 4 I do not know. The commentaries explain that King Solomon, the wisest of all men, was amazed by the 3 staple foods of Pesach. That was the 3 that are wondrous to me. And the 4 that I don't understand, what did King Solomon not understand? He couldn't understand the 4 kinds that we use on Sukkot. The lulav, the etrog, the myrtle, and the willow branch that we bind together and we say the bracha on. Okay, now what does this mean? Because King Solomon is not you and I. King Solomon is known as the wisest person who has ever lived on planet Earth. So how could it be that King Solomon, the wisest of all men, could not comprehend the 3 foods of Pesach and the 4 kinds of Sukkot? What was it that he couldn't understand? And this is it. Listen carefully. The 3 foods that we eat on Pesach are not just Pesach, the korban Pesach, the meat, not just matzah, not just maror. In fact, they represent 3 types of people, or 3 human profiles. That meat that the Jewish people roasted, imagine that great meat that we eat on the braai. So delicious and amazing, it's a braai meat. I mean, who doesn't like a good piece of steak? So the delicious taste of the Pesach roasted meat symbolizes that inspired, that passionate person, that person whose heart is on fire towards godliness, that person who is so excited and motivated to serve God. It represents that person that jumps up in the morning and just can't wait to make this world a better place, to just find an opportunity to do good, just to make a difference in this world. The Pesach meat represents that inspired, that passionate, that fiery Jew. Again, because the Pesach offering was roasted on the fire. So it symbolizes that fiery person, passionate and excited. The matzah, well, the matzah is slightly bland. It's pretty much, it's tasteless. I mean, it's nice as you're hungry at the Pesach Seder and you bite into that first bite of matzah. Tastes great, tastes good, but after a while, it tastes pretty bland on its own like that. And that represents the average Jew. That's the Jew, I don't know, they're not really turned on, they're not really turned off. They're just like very blah. They go through the motions of Judaism. They just go through it. Why? Because this is what I do. There's no passion, there's no excitement. It's almost like a tasteless kind of motion, almost like the matzah is tasteless and blah and bland. That's the kind of person that, whatever, I'll just do what I do. No passion involved over here, no excitement. Then you've got the maror. And the maror, if you make it correctly and you seal it properly, the maror is bitter. It can make you fly through that roof. My kid's favorite part of the Seder is watching my father taste the maror and see how strong the maror is, how red my father's face will go. So the maror represents that person who is bitter, the person who is resentful towards Judaism, towards God, towards tradition, towards life in general. That person who battles, just often angry and resentful for whatever case it is, whatever the reason may be. But there's that anger and resentment and that bitterness that's within that person. And so the three foods actually also represent three types of people, which are the Korban Pesach. The Pesach offering was sacred. It was holy. We don't have it today because we're not at that level yet. We don't have a temple. We don't live in those holy times, sacred times. So the Pesach offering was offered in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, in the Beit HaMikdash. It had the most wonderful aroma. It was the most amazing, wondrous smell. That is symbolic of the tzaddik, the righteous Jew, that sacred individual whose entire life is permeated with spirituality, with holiness, with goodness. His entire life is just of beauty and delicious smells. That's who he is. Every moment of his day, he's conscious of what he's doing, who he is, of the soul that's inside of him, and how he can serve God. The matzah, it's never perfectly delicious. It's often tasteless, as we said. That represents the Jew that we call, in fact, the Tanya calls the Jew the Beinoni. The Beinoni is that intermediate person. He lives the moral life. He's a good person. Yet, he often has to confront these tasteless, bland moments in his life. You see, the tzaddik is always inspired by God. He's always on fire. He's always passionate. But the Beinoni, this intermediate Jew, this middle Jew, he's really got to struggle. He's got challenges in his life. He's got to struggle with moments where he feels numb, paralyzed. He actually feels nothing. In fact, maybe he even feels a bit of apathy, boredom. He's going to struggle with those moments and move through them, go through them in order to serve God with excitement. And so he struggles a lot. He's the matzah kind of Jew. And the maror represents the third type of Jew, which is a weak human being. He doesn't live up to his true spiritual identity. He's not living with that soul that God implanted inside of him, because life is full of pressures. Life is full of challenges. And there are so many temptations around us every moment of our day that the maror Jew often falls to immorality, to addictions, to sins, to not such good things. This person's life is often full of bitter, sour moments. He's angry, he's resentful. Tanya calls him the Rasha Jew. So you've got the tzaddik, the Beinoni, the middle Jew, and the Rasha. By the way, according to the Tanya, most of us Jews today, well, I'll talk about myself, we would fall into the category of being a Rasha, the third type of Jew, which means the Beinoni, the middle Jew, is a very, very, very high level to attain and to reach, to be able to struggle with those moments and to get through them, past them successfully with flying colors. Now, each of these three types of people have got to find freedom. We've just entered Chodesh Nisan, which is known as Chodesh Hagula, the month of our redemption. Pesach is called Zman Cherutenu, the time of our freedom. Pesach is all about freedom, all about liberation. And so too, these three types of people, which actually are all Jewish people, have got to find freedom, got to find liberation in some way. And so the Seder night is their special opportunity to free themselves from whatever it may be that holds them back from reaching their maximum potential, from living life optimally, of just living life, not just surviving through life, not just surviving through another week, through another month, but through actually living and thriving every moment of their lives. There's always something that's stopping us. And Pesach is about realizing, what is it that is stopping me from living to my full potential? Finding that, nipping it in the bud, and moving forward. And so each of these three types of people have their moments. They each have their place at the Seder. In the times of the temple, we had a time to eat the Korban Pesach, the meat. We then have a time to eat the matzah, and then we have a time to eat the maror as well. But they remain separate, which means the matzah Jew, the maror Jew, the meat Jew, each have their own space in order to work on their own personal freedom. Three distinct, very different paths that are searching for freedom. And again, obviously, you can never compare each person's struggle, each person's search for freedom, because you can't compare the tzaddik, the way he struggles, with the struggles of the matzah or the maror Jew. It's completely different. It's worlds apart. It's challenges that are on either side of the spectrum. They are worlds apart. They each view life and interpret life in such different ways. But this is where Hillel comes in. And Hillel says like this. He insists, if you do not have the Pesach, the matzah, and the maror eaten together in one bite, according to Hillel, your entire Pesach Seder is invalidated. You could have sat there the whole Pesach Seder. You could have done everything correctly, except you could have skipped the 10th step, not eaten the sandwich together. And according to Hillel, your entire Seder is invalidated and was worth, don't know if you can say worth nothing, but according to Hillel, you didn't do the Pesach Seder correctly. What does he mean by that? If these three types of people did not learn or do not learn to experience Pesach as one, to experience freedom as a wrap together, then none of those people can actually internalize the deeper, true meaning of what freedom really is. Because to experience liberation, freedom in the truest sense of what freedom means, you've got to be able to unite and bring together the meat, the matzah, and the maror as one in one bite together. And the question is, how is this physically possible? Yes, I can put them in my mouth together. I can take a bite into the sandwich. But how can you compare the meat Jew? How can you bring that meat Jew together with the matzah Jew, together with the maror Jew, without compromising the ideals of the Pesach, of the meat Jew? I see we've just lost electricity, and I see people have lost it. Okay, stay on if you've still got electricity. Load shedding has just hit. So how can the Korban Pesach Jew unite with the maror Jew without compromising the ideals and the values of himself? He's going to be lowering his standards if he's going to unite together with that resentful, bitter Russia of a maror Jew. How can the inspired Jew and the angry Jew get together as one? This is a mystery. And even King Solomon, the wisest of all men, declared, what did he say? Three things are wondrous to me. How can these three people unite together? How can these three people come together and unite as one? It makes no sense. It seems irrational, illogical, and undoable. And this is actually why he also said, four I don't know, because that's the very same idea of the four species that we take on Sukkot. We unite the lulav, which is the Torah Jew, with the etrog, who is the Torah and the mitzvah Jew, with the myrtle, who is just the mitzvah Jew, with the willow, who is the nothing Jew, doesn't do Torah, doesn't do mitzvahs, and you bring them as one together. It's the same thing over there that King Solomon says, I don't understand how you can bring those four together. But Hillel demanded it. Hillel said, you don't have a choice. And only Hillel could have demanded this, because his unique personality was all about this. And so in order to truly understand this, let's take a moment, bear with me, as we just go into who Hillel was. Who was this personality who insisted that you have to unite all three types of Jews together? I'm going to tell you two stories. The Talmud tells us Always strive to be humble like Hillel and not as strict as Shammai. What does that mean? I'm going to tell you a story. There was a man living in the times of Hillel who made a bet for an exorbitant amount of money, 400 zuz. What was the bet about? I bet you that I can make Hillel lose his temper. Watch me. And if I win, if Hillel loses his temper, you owe me 400 zuz. It was Friday afternoon. You know the chaos of Erev Shabbos Friday afternoon? No matter, you could be the most calm person, there is always that last minute chaos that sets into the house. Friday afternoon, Hillel was busy washing up. There was a knock on his door. A man walks in and says, Hillel, is Hillel here? Hillel puts on his cloak, his towel, whatever it was. He comes out to greet the man. And the man says, I've got an urgent question to ask you, Reb Hillel. Reb Hillel, can you explain to me, why are the heads of the Babylonians so round? This is Erev Shabbos. Hillel responds, okay, profound question, good question. It's because the Babylonian midwives are not actually so skilled at their job that the Babylonians come out with these exceptionally round heads. Thank you. He walks away. The man leaves. He returns a couple of minutes later as Hillel is again busy doing something else. And he comes back and back and back and back with the most ridiculous, irrelevant questions. Why are the feet of the Africans so wide? And why are the eyes of the Talmudians so round? And he comes with these crazy questions on Erev Shabbos when, Hillel has got a bunch of things to do. These things could wait till Sunday afternoon. But every single time, Hillel would just stop his preparations and he answered the man with such respect, acknowledging every single time how profound and brilliant each one of his questions were. This man, I think is safe to say, was an absolute nudnik, a pain in the neck. And yet, Hillel's patience was beyond brilliant. Finally, he realized that there's just nothing he could do. There is no way that he could break Hillel. There is no way that he can get Hillel to lose his temper. And he says, may there not be many among you, among Israel. To which Hillel says, excuse me, why? And he says, because of you, I've lost 400 zuz. And Hillel says, better for you to lose 400 zuz and another 400 zuz than for Hillel to lose his temper. The Talmud continues to tell us about a few more stories. There were stories about how these converts wanted to convert in the most ridiculous fashion. They came to Shammai, and Shammai pretty much just threw them out. Wasn't interested in listening to them. They then came to Hillel. And what were the conditions? There was one convert that came to Shammai first and said, I want you to convert me on condition that you only teach me the written Torah. I don't want to know about the oral Torah. Only the written Torah. Now, we know as Jews, that's impossible. You can't only learn the written Torah. The other person said, convert me on condition that I'll be standing on one foot and you'll convert me. And the third person came on condition that you will appoint me as the high priest of Israel. Convert me. Now, Shammai felt that all three of these people were totally ridiculous. Obviously, he had no understanding of what converting to Judaism actually meant, and he sent all of them away separately. But Hillel was different. And Hillel accepted them in a gradual, skillful, patient, brilliant process. He showed them slowly how they were wrong in their perspectives, how the way they were thinking wasn't correct. You can't do this way, you can't do it that way, how their approach to Judaism had to slightly alter and change in order to convert. And guess what? They all converted properly, completely kosher. The three of these converts met and they all commented on Hillel's humility, his gentleness, his personality. That is what brought us closer to Judaism. That is what made us converts. And the question is, if you listen to these stories, what was the secret behind Hillel's patience? How did he manage to be so tolerant? Was he lying when he told this nudnik that his questions were so profound and amazing and brilliant? What was the secret? What was the secret to Hillel over here? The answer is that Hillel was not naive. He wasn't this pushover rabbi who was scared of confrontation, who was scared to hurt somebody else's feelings. We're talking about Hillel, who was one of the greatest leaders that we've had in Jewish history. He understood something about human beings all those years ago, something that we struggle to understand and grasp today. And this is what he understood. He understood that some people have difficulty dealing with views and perspectives and outlooks that differ from their own, which means when somebody who has a totally different perspective to you confronts that person begins to emotionally disintegrate. They completely break down. They don't know what to do. Or another thing that could happen is that they may use anger, rage, frustration to shout back at that person that dares to have a different perspective on whatever it is than they do. And somehow they feel compelled to delegitimize their opponent and bring them down completely and show them how they're totally wrong and I'm totally right. But there are people that are able to deal with these ideas that are opposite to their own. How? How is that possible? How can some people deal with another person's idea that is totally different to mine, and there are other people that can't deal with that? It's got to do with spacing. It's an issue of spacing. You see, some brains don't have the space to allow another idea to sit within the brain. And so when an opposing view comes into my mind, they're scared that what's going to happen? This opposing view is totally going to override my identity. And so my brain can't contain these two contrasting, different, totally separate ideas at the very same time. They can't both be in my brain at the same time. And if I'm going to have to listen to another person's view, that's almost a form of like mental death for me. That means that I'm destroying myself completely. And so what does a person like that need to do? They feel compelled to totally destroy and bring down the other person in order to keep my identity going. If I'm going to keep my own identity, I've got to totally destroy you, destroy yours, so that you don't override and take mine over. But there are other brains that do have the space. They do have the capacity, and they can hold different ideas, even contrasting ideas at the very same time. This person may believe that he's completely correct. My view is totally right. You are totally wrong. But I can understand where you're coming from. I can appreciate where you're coming from. And so I could argue with you ferociously. I could sit here from today and tomorrow and argue how I'm right and you're wrong. But I can argue with you without crushing you, without destroying you. I'm not stuck in that notion that it's my view only and there's no other view that exists. And so there are people that have the ability to contain both contrasting ideas at the very same time. And that is a secret to relationships, to the beauty of relationships. When you're able to appreciate and understand where the other person is coming from, the journey of the other person, what brought into these conclusions, why does he think like this? You're able to understand that it's not a form of mental death. I'm not destroying myself. I'm just allowing myself to appreciate where the other person is coming from. And that was Hillel. That is exactly what Hillel personified. He didn't torture himself by trying to put on a good show when this nudnik came pestering him on a Friday afternoon, but he genuinely created room in his soul, in his brain, in his mind. He really had the space, this capacity for diversity. Hillel had the ability to see things from the other person's perspective. Even though I don't agree with you, even though I think you may be wrong, he was able to really understand and appreciate where that person was coming from. And so when it came to those converts, Hillel really felt for those 3 converts. And he needed to get a feel, why are they asking such strange conditions? Why is he saying only the written Torah, on one foot, only if you make me the high priest? He understood for a second, he took a step back to try and understand where they're coming from. What made them ask these strange questions, these strange conditions? I don't have to reject them, which is what Shammai landed up doing, but rather just show them where, patiently, slowly, show them where they're wrong and how they can grow optimally and effectively. And in general, we see this approach throughout Hillel's life. This is who he was. In Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, one of Hillel's famous sayings was, we read it in Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, Hevei mitalmidav shel Aaron, be like the student of Aaron, Aaron the high priest, Moshe's brother, or Hev shalom b'rodef shalom, who loves peace and pursues peace. Or Hevet Abriot, he loves the creations, the creatures, or Makarvan la Torah, and he brings them close to Torah. That is exactly what Hillel's philosophy was all about. If you want to draw people closer to you, you want to draw people closer to God, to Torah, you want to draw people closer to you in general, first, love them. First, relate to them. First, you've got to understand them. You cannot bring them into your circle unless they feel loved and understood first. And of course, one of the famous sayings of Hillel, again from Ethics of our Fathers, is, what is hateful to you, do not do to your friends. Again, this is how Hillel lived his life. He actually practiced what he preached. He didn't just preach these things. It's so easy to preach them, but he practiced them on a daily basis. And the Talmud brings story after story to prove to us how this is who Hillel was. This is what Hillel did. And so it's so appropriate that it was Hillel who invented the sandwich, because it was Hillel who believed with every fiber of his being that the three types of people not only should come together, but they have to come together. Hillel once said, Im eina mili mili, uchshani le'atzmi ma'ani. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I care only for myself, then what am I? That was Hillel. I cannot care only for myself. I cannot worry only about my own personal growth, my own personal development, reaching my own personal freedom and liberation. The meat Jew has got to always remember that his true freedom will only be achieved if he joins together, understands, appreciates, and loves the matzah Jew and the maror Jew, and brings them in on the journey together. And the three of them take the journey together. And so at each one of our Seders in just 2 weeks' time, what do? We try and emulate Hillel. We try and be just like Hillel. What do? Before eating the korech sandwich, before beginning the 10th step, we say, Kain asa Hillel bizman shebeit hamikdash haya kayam. We say the words, this is what Hillel did at the times of the temple. We give the reason why we eat the sandwich. Because if we didn't say the sentence and we just said, all right, good, it's step number 10, we're getting closer to the meal. Everybody take your matzah, bring the maror, bring the meat inside, eat it together. Let's all eat it together now. Crunch. Then we could ask ourselves a question and say, how can I possibly join with these Jews that are so far away from me? If I am a maror Jew, then how can I possibly bring myself anywhere near a matzah Jew or a meat Jew? How can I do that? I'm miles, kilometers away from them. How can I join with Jews who are so far away from my beliefs, from my values, from my morals, from my lifestyle, from my religious level? How can I do it? It's almost impossible. Just chuck it out the window. How can I truly love somebody else without compromising my own morals, my own identity? And that's a brilliant question. It's a good question. And so what do we answer at the Seder? We say, Kain asa Hillel. This is what Hillel did, meaning, when did he do this? Bizman shebeit hamikdash haya kayam. At the times of the temple. You see, in the times of the temple, the Jews were on a way higher spiritual level than we are today. And in the times of the temple, in the times of Hillel, there were many more Pesach, meat, beef Jews than there are today. And so Hillel showed there is the possibility to love. Even in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, when there are meat Jews and matzah Jews and maror Jews, even then it was easy to unite all Jews. Certainly today in 2021, when you and I living in non-temple times in Johannesburg, when all we have left are mostly matzah and maror Jews, we're more of the same kind of people. How much more so if he could do it in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, then for sure you and I can do this today. We can all become one sandwich of matzah and maror together. And this is what's going to help us to reach that personal freedom. That when I can really appreciate where the other person is coming from, feel for them, understand them, that brings me to a way deeper, more profound level within myself. I want to share with you a magnificent story that I came across about the Skuliner Rebbe. He lived from 1896 and he passed away in 1982. He was a great Hasidic Rebbe. And towards the end of the Second World War, towards the end of the Holocaust, it was actually March 1945, he found himself, along with many other Holocaust survivors, in a certain Russian town, which I can't even pronounce the name. Pesach was actually only a few weeks away. And this Skuliner Rebbe, he was adamant that he was going to find wheat and he was going to make shmura matzah, not just matzah, but the best type of matzah, shmura matzah, which is properly guided and watched from the moment the wheat is cut. And he was going to make the shmura matzah. And he was going to be able to bake a limited amount of these matzahs. And what did he do? He sent word to all the leaders in the vicinity, letting them know that I'm baking matzah and I'm offering each of the leaders just 3 matzahs. That's all I have to give each leader. 3 matzahs and make a communal, seder together with your people. And this is what he did. And again, you can imagine the appreciation and the gratitude that people around had to receive shmura matzah in March 1945. It was just a week before Pesach. Okay, so pressure's building up over here. Reb Moshe Hager, who was the son of the great Vishnitzer Rebbe, he came for the matzahs to get the matzahs that had been offered to his father, the great Vishnitzer Rebbe. And after he got his 3 matzahs, he turned to the Skuliner Rebbe and he says to him like this: I know that you sent word to all the leaders around that you're only offering them 3 matzahs. But my father, the great Vishnitzer Rebbe, he asked me to tell you that he must have 6 matzahs. He's got to have them. So the Skuliner Rebbe was a bit shocked to hear this. I mean, this is like just post-Holocaust. We're trying to, get whatever we can together. But if the great Vishnitzer Rebbe needs 6 matzahs, I can't say no. Who am I to say no? And so reluctantly, he gives him over 6 matzahs. It was the day before Pesach. And this Reb Moshe Hager, the Vishnitzer Rebbe's son, returns back to the Skuliner Rebbe. And he says to him, I want to return 3 of the matzahs that you gave me. And he says, I don't understand. I thought your father absolutely had to have 6 matzahs. You told me last week he had to have 6 matzahs. And he says to him, my father asked me to ask you, did you save any matzahs for yourself? To which the Skuliner Rebbe turns red, embarrassed, and he says, how could I? How could I save matzahs for myself when everybody around me needed matzah? And so Reb Moshe Hager turns to him and says, my father assumed that that's exactly what would have happened to you. And so he's returning these 3 matzahs. A kosher and a freilich and Pesach, he says to him. We've got to continue the work of Hillel. Sitting at our Seder in 2 weeks' time, we've got to continue the work of Hillel, which is to never stop wrapping Jews together. We've got to build bridges between us and Jews around the world. In fact, us and our neighbors, us and our family. We've got to keep building those bridges around us, realizing that a life of dignity means a life of true inner freedom, which is the ability to always try and see things from the other person's perspective, to be like Hillel, yes, I may have my own views and I may be stuck with my own beliefs and I may feel strongly about my ideals, but I've got to be able to also appreciate where you're coming from and why you believe things like you do and why you live a life like you do. I've got to be able to appreciate your identity. I've got to be able to make room for other people around me, even if I don't agree with you, even if I want to bring you down. I've got to still be able to make that room for you. And so what does personal freedom actually mean? It means sensitivity, which is the ability to be there fully for somebody else, to put yourselves in the other person's shoes and understand life from their perspective, just like the Vishnitzer Rebbe was able to completely and fully understand what the Skuliner Rebbe was doing, where he was coming from, and how this guy was making matzah, yet he wasn't going to be left with any matzah for himself. And putting himself in his shoes, that is the secret to true freedom. To bring the matzah Jews, the Maro Jews, and the Pesach Jews together as one. We are a Jewish nation. We beat as one heart, whether we like it or not. We've just got to start appreciating where the other person comes from and realizing that it's not going to help us to bring the other person down, because at the end of the day, we are one beating heart. So let us come together this year to reach this incredible level of personal freedom during Zman Cheretenu, the time of our freedom. I wish you a Chag Sameach, a Chodesh Tov, and please God, it should be a month of personal freedom and national freedom with the coming of Mashiach. Please God, Amen.